and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. The Israeli military warns it will use unprecedented force in Gaza City, urging residents to flee south. The army closes the main Salah al-Din evacuation route after 48 hours, saying only al-Rashid Street remains open. The United States vetoes a UN Security Council resolution demanding an immediate Gaza ceasefire and lifting aid restrictions, despite 14 members voting in favour. Denmark calls it a humanitarian and human failure, as famine is confirmed in Gaza. Democratic senators in the United States introduced the first ever Senate resolution urging recognition of a Palestinian state as US allies move in the same direction. The measure faces long odds, with Republicans holding a majority and President Trump opposing it. Russia launches 86 drones overnight, with Ukraine intercepting most but 15 still hitting targets. 5 civilians are killed in a strike on Konstantinivka, while attacks in Kharkiv, Kherson and Zaporozhye injure several others and damage homes. Sudan's Rapid Support Forces launch a drone strike on a mosque in Darfur's Abu Shouk camp, killing 75 displaced civilians. The attack comes as RSF fights to control al-Fashir, with the UN warning of rising war crimes and ethnic violence. A British couple detained by the Taliban in Afghanistan since February are freed after Qatari mediation and flown to Doha. Barbie and Peter Reynolds had spent months in custody, prompting concerns over their health and safety. Afghanistan rejects President Donald Trump's call for US troops to return and reclaim the strategic Bagram base. Kabul says it is open to engagement but will not allow a new American military presence near China's borders. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un calls artificial intelligence a top priority for modernizing weapons, including new drones. State media says he watched performance tests of multi-purpose drones and surveillance vehicles in Pyongyang. Now, for this hour, we start in Europe, where Russia's defense ministry says its forces have taken control of 2 villages in eastern Ukraine. According to reports, Moravika in Donetsk and Novoanyanka in Zaporozhye are now under Russian control. This news has not been independently verified, however, yet. The move comes amid ongoing military operations in eastern Ukraine, highlighting the strategic contest for territory in the region. The situation remains very tense, with no confirmation from Ukrainian officials. Okay, we're now joined by Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, and he joins us live from London on this. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. We've just cited 2 new Russian-claimed settlements in eastern Ukraine. We have had the news of 5 deaths today, as well as this news. Of course, this comes as Russia does make gains, but not as much as it may be stating. What are your thoughts on the current developments on the battlefield and Russia's narrative that it is leading with when it comes to this?
Good to be with you again, Thomas. It just illustrates it's inch by inch. If we read various reports, certain people have even said in a particular report that at this rate it would take Russia till 2056 to take the whole of Ukraine, or if any of the other regions that they wish to then take. And as you're aware, and as I am aware, and everyone else, that of the losses on both sides. But if we concentrate on the Russian losses, which are extensive, and also within their armaments, it is extensive. Now, as you quite rightly said, we're waiting for this to be confirmed. The Russians are very, very good at their own propaganda. Whether they say we're doing this or then go into denial of that, there is no doubt. The proof is out there. But it does show you it's inch by inch. It's as though it's trench warfare along the lines of looking at the First World War, where suddenly you may take a few hundred yards and then you're pushed back. Russia has taken villages, and then the Ukrainian forces have actually pushed them back in various regions along that border, and where the Russians have actually invaded, Thomas.
Yes, Mark. What we mentioned it briefly, but what role does the information war play in shaping the international perception here of the Ukraine conflict? We now have some former allies, well, we still say allies of Ukraine, but supporters of Ukraine now possibly getting tired of this conflict and now willing for Ukraine to make concessions here. What role does the information war play in shaping the perception around the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
I think the information war, the propaganda war, is playing a huge role here, because the last thing that, in many ways, that Russia would want to admit is that their economy is in dire straits, and how long can they actually afford to pay their own soldiers on the front line? Could that money dry up by 2026? All sorts of reports. But as you quite rightly say, yes, it is a propaganda. The Russians may be accused of something. They will, of course, deny that, obfuscate, and say, no, we are then winning, and we're taking this ground. It's the information war in battle now, as we see, particularly in other situations in the world, is paramount. It is a key part of the armor, Thomas.
Yes, Mark, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure talking to you. We will, of course, bring you all the updates coming out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict as we get them, and we will bring them to you. We now move over to the Middle East for our next story, where the Israeli military has warned it will operate with unprecedented force in Gaza City, urging residents to flee south. This comes as it announced the closure of the Salah al-Din road, a temporary evacuation route that had been opened just 48 hours earlier. In a post on X, the military's Arabic language spokesman, Avarici Ardi, said the road is now closed for southbound travel and warned that operations against Hamas and other groups will intensify. However, Aradi later stated that sections of the Salah al-Din street would remain open for a few more hours today, allowing civilians a limited window to escape. He shared a map showing designated areas for displacement, noting the route would stay open until 12 p.m. local time. Meanwhile, traffic has come to a near standstill on the parallel Al-Rashid Street as thousands continue fleeing the city. In a security cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blamed Jordan for the deadly attack at the Allenby crossing carried out by a Jordanian aid truck driver. He demanded stricter inspections and metal detectors for all incoming trucks, saying it was Jordan's responsibility to prevent the attack. Netanyahu emphasised that Al-Rashid Street is now the only route south and urged remaining residents to take this chance to move to the designated humanitarian area. Okay, we're now joined by Ross Feingold, and he is a political analyst, and he joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Thank you very much for joining us, Ross, first of all. It's a pleasure to have you as always. Let's start, Ross, with the statements that have come from Israel's defense minister. It says that Israel is going to operate with unprecedented force here. How does this escalation alter the regional dynamics of this conflict, and what can we expect from this ground assault?
Looking at this from the political perspective, it's clear that, as has been the case for most of the nearly 2 years of the war, that Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu they're going to conduct the war as they see fit, and it doesn't matter to them what kind of international criticism. I mean, obviously, international criticism has been mounting in recent months, and including in recent days with the UN report, for example, and countries willing to recognize Palestine at the upcoming UN meeting. But that does not have any effect on the decision-making of Netanyahu or the instructions that he issues to the military, or that the defense minister, who you just cited, issues to the military. So countries in the region, you asked about that, they're going to complain, they're going to publicly criticize Israel, of course, and some of them will do so very vociferously, but that will not change what's coming up in the next few days, which is obviously that the Israeli military is going to fight their way into Gaza City. And, as far as what's going to happen on the ground, obviously this is going to be a vicious battle within an urban setting. Israel has a far more powerful military than Hamas, but Hamas is not defeated. And there's going to be a lot of Hamas fighters who are ultimately killed, but unfortunately there are going to be a lot of civilians who die as well, especially if they don't evacuate.
Yeah, indeed, Ross. And let's move on now to the situation with Jordan. Netanyahu's publicly blamed them, a rare partner under Israel's peace treaties. What does this say about the regional stability here in after this situation, which happened just a day ago?
Certainly throughout the course of the war, as the humanitarian situation in Gaza has worsened, Jordan has been more vociferous in its criticisms of Israel, and now the Israeli side is returning that by being vociferous in its criticisms of Jordan. Ultimately, again, this is like the situation with other countries. Jordan and the king could criticize Israel using strong language, but it will not change how Israel conducts operations in the coming days around Gaza City. But the thing to watch here is how does it affect cooperation with bringing aid into Gaza? It has to be trucked in from the border, and that's just something to watch. We know that at times in recent months, Israel has been listening to the international criticism about the food situation, and Israel has been more willing to allow in a larger amount of aid, and Jordan is certainly an important participant in that process. So it's definitely something to watch in coming days, how this actually affects the flow of aid into Gaza.
Yes, Ross Feingold, do stay with us. We have some more news coming out. A related development where Luxembourg's Prime Minister Luc Frieden says next week's United Nations summit in New York could be a key moment on the long road to Middle East peace. He confirmed that Luxembourg will join French President Emmanuel Macron's initiative to recognise a Palestinian state. Let's listen to his statements.
Je crois que c'est un pas important dans une longue marche vers une paix et stabilité dans la région. Je crois que ça ne va pas se faire du jour au lendemain, mais ce qui est important de voir qu'il y a dans cette réunion les pays arabes et les pays européens. S'il y avait simplement 3-4 pays européens qui diraient nous on va reconnaître la Palestine, je crois que ça ne changerait rien. Ce qui compte de voir lundi, c'est qui sera autour de la table et qu'est-ce que diront les États arabes aussi par rapport à Israël. Parce qu'on parle bien de 2 États. Et je voudrais que les peuples israéliens et palestiniens gardent l'espoir pour un jour pouvoir vivre en paix.
The move comes as more countries signal support for recognition amid growing international condemnation of Israel's nearly 2-year offensive in Gaza. Okay, we move next to Africa, where a deadly drone strike by Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces killed at least 75 people at a mosque in the Abu Shouk camp for displaced persons in Darfur on Friday. The attack, confirmed by the Emergency Response Room aid group, occurred as RSF forces intensified their offensive to seize control of El Fasher, the last army stronghold in the Darfur region. According to a new UN report, the civil war in Sudan has worsened as it entered its 3rd year, with rising reports of ethnic violence, civilian casualties and human rights abuses. UN Human Rights Office says Sudan has seen a significant rise in civilian killings during the first half of this year due to growing ethnic violence. Since April of 2023, Sudan has been gripped by a brutal war between the regular armed forces and the paramilitary RSF. We're once again joined by Ross Feingold. Ross, what more can you tell us about this war? Why has fighting broken out and why has it carried on for so long now?
Well, the fighting has continued almost continuously since the civil war broke out in 2023. And one of the key factors in prolonging this war is the support from foreign countries. Both sides have enjoyed this support, whether that's cash or military equipment. A larger number of countries seem to be supporting the Sudan armed forces, but the RSF does have support, most notably from the United Arab Emirates, and this has allowed the war to continue. And unfortunately, we have to be frank, global attention is not focused on this war, and people have called it a forgotten war, which unfortunately might be a correct description. But with the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine taking up so much international attention, and to a lesser extent, the situation in Myanmar as well, there's just not a lot of attention on the war in Sudan.
Yeah, indeed, Ross. And of course, as its conflict enters its third year, who's politically benefiting from it and how?
Yeah, that again goes to the issue of the international support for either side. And countries have their own incentives for being involved. So, Egypt is involved because they have issues with Ethiopia, and Sudan has been a partner with Egypt in that regard. There are other players from Ethiopia, regional armies that have taken sides, and then the Gulf states have also picked their own sides. Russia was involved at some point, so was the old Wagner group, mercenaries. They were involved on a different side than the Russian government. So different players have had their own incentives to be involved. Sometimes it's about larger geopolitical issues, but sometimes it's just about making money, unfortunately. But some of the people or countries who've been involved have done so for financial reasons. So there's a number of incentives that different countries have had to be involved, but ultimately the result has been to prolong the war. And there just doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon indicating that this situation is going to resolve. In fact, I would say if there's any short-term ceasefire, it's unlikely to resolve the situation over the long term, and that hostilities would flare up again.
Yes, Ross, thank you very much. Pleasure to get your insight on that topic. We now move on over. As the annual session of the UN General Assembly convenes, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has spoken about a host of issues, including Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, and refugees. Antonio Guterres has warned that the world is facing a global crisis. He has highlighted that there is a sense of impunity among few countries. The UN chief also noted that the geopolitical divides remain the obstruction in effectively addressing the conflicts. Let's take a listen in to his statements.
We are facing a global crisis. Conflicts are multiplying in the context in which geopolitical divides do not allow to effectively address them. There is a sense of impunity. Every country believes they can do whatever they want. So in this context, we absolutely need leaders to come here and to turn the tide, to come here and understand that international cooperation is vital in a moment like this, to come here and do the negotiations and the mediations that are necessary to at least create hope for peace in some of the situations we are facing.
Meanwhile, Antonio Guterres mentioned the conflicts of Palestine, Sudan and Ukraine, stressing that the war in Gaza must come to an end. He talked about a ceasefire deal and the release of hostages. When mentioning Ukraine, the UN chief talked about the big powers' attitude of acting with a sense of impunity. He asked countries to oppose the wars. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
I believe that there will be a clear clear demonstration that the overwhelming majority of the countries in the world recognize the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, recognize that there must be a Palestinian state, and recognize it in the meeting we'll have on Monday, and at the same time send a very clear message that the carnage that is happening in Gaza has to end, that we need a ceasefire immediately, with the release of all hostages immediately too. The suffering of the Sudanese people is horrible. So I think it's time for the Security Council to be able to take, with the agreement of all the key powers, very tough measures on Sudan. As we live in a world of impunity, it is easy for countries that see the examples of big powers waging war, as in the case of the Ukraine. There is a stimulus for mid-sized countries to try to solve their ambitions or their problems through war, instead of negotiation, instead of compromise. And this is becoming a pattern that needs to be strongly opposed.
Now we turn from North America to the Indo-Pacific, where South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun says next month's Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, or APEC, forum will be a big and key opportunity to discuss pending issues between South Korea and China, as Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to attend. Cho emphasized the importance of the summit for improving bilateral ties and addressing difficult topics, including overlapping maritime disputes. On another front, Cho addressed recent immigration raids in Georgia, saying South Korea is seeking an agreement with the United States to resolve visa issues affecting Korean workers. During a visit to Beijing, Cho also met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who highlighted the importance of strong trade relations between the two countries. South Korea hopes the upcoming APEC summit will deepen these ties. Let's in fact listen in to what the South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun has to say.
그리고 이번 기회에 시진핑 주석이 오랜만에 방한을 하기 때문에 한국으로서도 한중 간에 많은 여러 가지 현안들을 잘 토의하고 또 한중 관계 발전을 위해서 이 시진핑 주석의 방안을 좋은 계기로 만들려고 하고 있습니다. 그 롱텀으로는 이런 문제를 해소하기 위한 새로운 비자 카테고리를 만든다든지 또는 그 비자와 관련된 한미 간의 합의를 이루어낸다든지 뭐 좀 더 손쉬운 방법으로 주한미국 대사관에서 비자 기업인 비자 특별 데스크를 만든다든지 이런 것들을 워킹그룹을 통해서 신속하게 협의해 나갈 계획으로 있습니다.
We're now joined by Andrew K.P. Leung. He is a China strategist and he joins us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. Do you think China could see mending ties with Seoul as a part of a larger strategy to counterbalance this US, Japanese, Korea trilateral cooperation?
Of course, from China's perspective, Korea is only one side of the picture. There are other forces which China has got to confront with, including the unilateral Trump administration, and then the American anti-China allies, including Japan, and to a certain extent South Korea, and also down the South China Sea, Philippines and Australia, with the Quad, with India, and of course the whole world, the free trade system has been totally upended by the Trump administration. So China is seeing the relationship with South Korea in this broader context. But as far as South Korea is concerned, its relationship with China is extremely important. Let's not forget the threat from North Korea. North Korea is now becoming a more independently minded and also nation, but also there is very little hope of any kind of unification with South Korea, in spite of the fact that there is a unification office established in South Korea a long time ago. But also the nuclear threat threatens the stability in the region. And of course, the North Korea's confrontation with the United States, tracing back to President Trump's across-the-border handshake with Kim, which resulted in nothing. And then years of the so-called six-party talks only served to inflame North Korea with Americans' insincerity. So the region is quite shaky geopolitically and militarily, and then China acts seen as an anchor for a degree of multi-dimensional and recalibrating relationship, both in terms of security, in terms of the military kind of guardrails, as well as economic cooperation. Let's not forget that there is a great deal of South Korean investment on the mainland China, and the two sides have been cooperating economically and to a certain extent competing, of course, in terms of high technology, semiconductor, the TV panels and that kind of thing. But the relationship has been very close. So I think that the Prime Minister of South Korea is viewing this relationship as extremely important, especially in the upcoming APEC summit.
Yes, Andrew K.P. Leung, thank you very much for giving us the rundown of that. Pleasure to have you on the programme as always. We now finish off with some news from the United States, where President Donald Trump has said that he did not want London Mayor Sadiq Khan at the state banquet hosted by King Charles at Windsor Castle. Trump called Khan among the worst mayors in the world and said he requested that the mayor not attend. Let's take a listen in to what he said today.
I don't want it there. I asked that he not be there. I think the mayor of London, Khan, is among the worst mayors in the world. Now, we have some bad ones. If you look at Chicago, if you look at, but I think he's the equivalent of the mayor of Chicago. I think he's done a terrible job. Crime in London is the mayor of London, Mayor Khan, has done a terrible job. And on immigration, he's a disaster. Now, I asked that he not be there. He wanted to be there, as I understand. I didn't want him. I've not liked that for a long time. I just think, I have a certain pride in London, UK. My mother was born in Scotland, Yeah, when I see Mayor Khan do a bad job, stabbings and dirt and the filth, it's not the same. I didn't want him to.
Reports suggest that Khan did not expect an invitation, with a source describing Trump's politics as spreading fear and division. The feud between Trump and Khan dates back to 2015, when Trump proposed banning Muslims from travelling to the United States. This latest row adds to years of tensions between the two, including Trump's criticism of Khan's handling of crime, immigration and terror incidents in London. Okay, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.